Hi and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to talk about a book that I personally really love. It's a short story collection. I've mentioned it before in one of my wrap-up videos. I will have the link of that wrap-up video. I think it's the mid-June wrap-up video. It's Intan Paramaditha's Apple and Knife, translated by Stephen J. Epstein into the English from the Indonesian. I really love this book, and this is a very interesting collection of short stories. This book is actually a collection of stories that are inspired by horror, local folklore, Southeast Asian folklore, especially Indonesian folklore, and also fairy tales, and they are sort of given this really modern and kind of surprising and also very feminist twist. And I think the highlight of this book is definitely on how feminist it is. It's very obvious when you get to the stories. You definitely get that this book is a very feminist book. Generally, all of the stories in this book, they are about female characters who sort of act in ways that are kind of beyond the expectation of society, whether it is through what they do, like the kind of job that they take, or the kinds of activities that they engage in, or in terms of how they view morality, how they carry themselves as individuals. So one of the descriptors of this book that I commonly see is that this book is a collection of stories about bad women or women behaving badly. There are women in this book who definitely behave in questionable manner, who does really questionable things. But at the same time, I think one of the things that this book does really well is that it is able to paint those characters, even those that do questionable things, in ways that make you feel that you can empathize with their humanity. So yeah, in this video I'm going to talk about this book, but I'm going to sort of mainly focus on stories that I love. In here, they are altogether, I think, 13 stories in this book, but I'm going to talk about only three stories because I think that's going to be too long, and as usual I like to ramble on and on. Anyway, so yeah, that's what the collection is about generally. So first I'm going to talk about this story called Blood, which is the second story in this collection. So in the story of Blood, it is actually kind of like I would say it's more of a story that concerns more about character rather than plot. So in that story we have a female writer who is experiencing menstruation, and so while she does this, she also recalls the experience, or rather the memory that she used to have with her mom, and what her mom told her about the experience of menstruating. In the present, her mom is already dead, so she thinks about the kinds of things that her mom used to tell her, and then there is also a mention, which I think is really interesting, a mention of a menstrual blood sucking female ghost in one of the stories that she used to hear as a kid. Now this is really interesting because at first in the story it seems kind of random that there is that kind of ghost appearing as a story in the flashback. I personally, having being a person who grew up in Southeast Asia, actually, this ghost is not something that feels very strange. It Not that I've seen it, but it is actually something that is quite familiar, especially when it comes to precautionary tales given by older people to younger people, especially girls and young women. And you can also see this figure in pulp stories as well. Like, this is the kind of figure that would sort of appear randomly and just sort of suck blood out of sanitary pad. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And usually they are sort of voiceless. They don't really talk. They just suck the blood, have their meal. Presumably that's their meal. And they are sort of painted as ominously evil, even though they seldom do evil things. But occasionally in certain stories they would do random violent stuff. And also they are kind of scary looking. So, Southeast Asian ghosts. That's kind of like the prereq. But anyway, this is the kind of figures that we usually hear in our folk stories, and it's really interesting that this ghost appear in this story. Now, what's even more interesting is that there is a twist concerning this particular ghost that happens at the end of this story. Basically, this whole story is just about the main protagonist kind of reflecting or contemplating on menstruation. So if you're not comfortable with this topic, this story might feel kind of uncomfortable to you, but yeah, I feel that this story just it flows really well, and it highlights the idea about menstruation as something that feels kind of it feels like it is an interesting experience, experienced differently by different individuals. Now, in this case, the way that the female protagonist experiences menstruation is definitely something that feels, the way that she describes it is kind of unique to her. And she does something that sort of relates to her menstruating condition in this book, something medical in this story as well. I'm not going to spoil that, but it definitely highlights how menstruation is an experience that is kind of like both universal, but at the same time it's kind of individual as well. And yeah, the ending of this book, there is certainly something that feels sort of fresh, especially for me, that when it comes to how what happens to the main protagonist in this ending. I think the ending is just something that really feel very strong to me. And I'm gonna stop at that because I might spoil it. Anyway, yeah, I really like this book. Oh yeah, also another reason why I sort of like this book is that I've always considered, as someone who does not menstruate, by the way, I've always considered it very strange as to, especially from where I'm coming from, it's very strange that menstruation is seen as something that is highly codified. It is turned into something that is very taboo, that I feel that it's bringing some really negative effects on what it means to menstruate. Because from the biological point of view, it's just a natural process. And when you really think about it, there is not exactly a lot of, well, not exactly a lot of, but there is no reason why it should be given this kind of like almost mythical or mystical like set of rules, prohibition attached to it, taboos attached to it. And I feel that these are the things that just feels kind of problematic, especially when it comes to discussions on gender or gender differences or gender dynamics. And I just find it really mind-boggling as to how menstruation just sort of becomes something that is painted as extremely negative, that things that people, especially those who don't menstruate, would talk in such a tone that it feels kind of it's like something that is talked in a very hushed tone, something that is scary or something that is mysterious and stuff. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Maybe you have an opinion about that as well. So I'll be interested to know what you think about that. Anyway, I think probably that's why this story really interests me. It's because it just talks about menstruation as a thing, as an experience, but it does not try to give too much that whole stereotypical mystique surrounding it. So yeah, that's why I like this story. Second story that I'm going to highlight is this one called The Obsessive Twist. Now this story is, I would say it's traditional in the sense that because it is set in an Indonesian village that is fairly conservative. So when you see things like religious conservatism versus freedom of expression, that those are kind of like the things that you expect from a story that is set in a place where the people are a bit more conservative. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that happen in the story. So what happens is we have this woman who is a talented singer. She is a dangdut singer. Now, for a bit of context, dangdut is kind of like an interesting musical genre. You can Google that. It's sort of nice, but it's very popular in Indonesia, and it has also spread to other areas in Nusantara as well. But generally, or rather historically speaking, dangdut has always had this kind of like reputation of being salacious, of being kind of sexually wild, sexually charged musical genre. I mean, no small contribution from the fact that the singers usually, gyrate. Typically, the dance moves of dangdut performers can be deemed suggestive. They're usually quite, they would do things like belly dancing and stuff. So, yeah, a lot of gyration in this musical genre, and so that's how this musical genre has sort of gained a notoriety as something that is frowned upon by more conservative side of society. And I would say not just in Indonesia, but in the story takes place in Indonesia. So yeah, we have this singer in this village who is very popular. A lot of people love her, especially men. And yeah, when she performs, she does do this kind of like sexy stuff during her performance, and that really attracts a lot of men. However, as time passes, religious conservatism actually comes to this village, and slowly it sort of it begins to take root in this village, and eventually this singer who used to be like really popular, she is now shunned even by the men who used to ogle her while she is performing on stage, who used to like desire after her. Central to the story, also aside from the woman, is a religious leader in this village. Now, this religious leader and this woman, they cross paths. Basically, this woman, this performer, she is also having her religious class in the village with this religious leader as her teacher, and something happens in that class that sort of prompts this singer to become somewhat of a person who is resentful of society, of the village, once the village decide to shun her because of her profession. So there's definitely a lot of hypocrisy in this story. Certainly something that you can expect whenever the themes of religious conservatism versus freedom of expression is explored in a story. That is in here. But what I really love is how this story sort of develops at the end. Basically, this woman does something. She also has another suitor who would become quite important in the development of the plot of this story. But this woman, she later does something that feels kind of shocking. The ending of this story is actually quite gruesome. It's very gory. So if you're not up to that kind of writing, then you might not feel comfortable reading this story. But yeah, it is very gory, very bloody. But I find that it explores this idea of hypocrisy, and especially the idea of the gaze, to be very effectively, because this woman starts out as a performer, and so as a performer, of course, there's this gaze that's constantly being placed on her, versus after she is shunned, now there's still this gaze. Gaze is such a prominent feature in this story that I feel that it deserves to be mentioned when this story is discussed. And also, of course, hypocrisy is there. It is certainly a kind of story that would make you feel kind of annoyed, angry even, by the people. But yeah, like all the other stories in this book, in this particular story, you certainly feel you're rooting for this singer, even after you read what she does at the end, which is not a pleasant thing, but you certainly see why she does those things. So yeah, that's the second story. Now the third story that I want to talk about, and also the last, I think, is called The Porcelain Doll. Now, the first two stories I mentioned earlier can be quite gory. So The Porcelain Doll, which is the second to last story in this book, is actually not gory at all. So if you are interested in reading it, I would suggest this one first, because it doesn't have all of those like really graphic details. So in The Porcelain Doll, we have a porcelain doll, and what happens is that this porcelain doll breaks, and the owner of the porcelain doll, and the porcelain doll was actually gifted to her by a relative. The owner she feels really sad about this porcelain doll. However, this story is not about the owner, it's about the porcelain doll itself, and also about the cat that broke the porcelain doll. The way the story unfolds, it it has a lot of twists and turns, because at the beginning you hear a lot about the owner. You know, the exposition of this story is mainly about the owner, and eventually it goes to the porcelain doll that this owner owns. And you also learn that this owner has a cat, but it feels like, you know, the main character in this story is going to be the owner, when in fact the focus would eventually shift later on to this porcelain doll. I mean, that's the title. So yeah, that's, in terms of the writing, you know, it feels really unique. Usually I would not like this kind of you know, where this kind of style where the focus would be diverted from one thing to another mid-story. But in this story, I think it really works. And at the end, it also shifts to a different thing, which is the cat that breaks the doll. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, the main story about this, the main thing that happens in this story is the fact that the doll breaks. It's literally just about that. But what the idea behind it is really interesting. And also I really like how this story is related to the figure of Sunil Bolong, which is actually, it's kind of like a female ghost in Indonesia. Like in Southeast Asia, we have no shortage of female ghosts. Anyway, Sunil Bolong is actually quite a famous, famous ghost in Indonesian folklore. And one of the feature of this ghost is that there is a hole on her back. So basically the name of the ghost literally means prostitute with ghost. Now, of course, you know, Southeast Asia, you know, women can't be like sexually free. Anyway, yeah, so this ghost is sort of depicted as something that is quite scary, it's quite gruesome. So if you are interested to know more about this ghost, feel free to Google that, but be careful of the Google image search. If you are, you know, if you feel queasy or if you feel scared easily, just be careful of that. But yeah, it's interesting information behind this ghost. Anyway, this story is not scary at all, but it does allude to this figure, and it relates to the porcelain doll that breaks, and it also relates to why the porcelain doll breaks. Now, obviously, the story is not going to just literally about a doll that breaks without giving anything extra. The ending of this story sort of reveals, in a way, why the doll breaks. And I find that really interesting because it really it talks about something that feels really basic as well. Definitely has something to do with you know, the women's experience. It has a very feminist angle to it, especially sort of like the ornamental value that is usually given to women, especially in a society that is a bit more traditional. And yeah, when I said that, I'm pretty sure you know how to relate that to a porcelain doll. But yeah, I like the way that idea is woven into the story of this doll being broken and why this doll breaks, and how the cat is actually how the cat comes into play in this whole story. So yeah, that's the final story I'm going to talk about. And I suppose that's all for this video. maybe if you are in, maybe you'll be interested in trying out this short story collection, or maybe if you have read this book, what you think about it. What's your favorite story? Let me know in the comments below, or if you have anything else to say, feel free to do so. And until then, I'll see you again in a different video. So take care. Bye bye.